Welcome to the Unitarian Universalist Fellowship of Columbus, Georgia. I'm Bill Harlan, your volunteer service leader. We are a community of people who don't share a creed, rather we share a commitment to support each other in our own unique, free, and responsible searches for truth and meaning. And we do that within the general framework of the 7 principles of Unitarian Universalism. So this morning's service, we are going to focus on our 7th principle, which is respect for the interdependent web of all existence, of which we are a part. And I know for many people this sounds somewhat intellectual and detached from reality. What it really means is taking care of our planet so it's safe and healthy for people. And today's speaker, Gwyn Rush, is going to talk about an idea that's fairly new and very specific and makes this all real. It's about treating a healthy environment as a basic human right. So thank you, Whittaker Locke, for choosing a perfect hymn to open this service. The title is Our World is One World, and absent the choir during our Zoom services and during our lockdown, I'd like to read just a couple lines from this hymn. Our world is one world. What touches one affects us all. The seas that wash us round about, the clouds that cover us, the rains that fall. So that's what we're going to be talking about and focusing on, taking care of our planet and making sure that a healthy environment is something that everybody can enjoy and thrive in. Today's reading is from Danielle Neale, who is a great member of our fellowship. They moved away. She's still a member. The pandemic has actually made it somewhat easier for her to stay in touch. And today's reading will be Simply Cherish the Planet by William Schultz, who's kind of a famous Unitarian who I was a little bit aware of, but is a really interesting man. It's a great reading, very much apropos for the service. And of course, Whittaker will have some more music. We do have some announcements this morning. And as we usually do during these Zoom services, we first turn it over to David Rush, who is our technology guru, and David will give us some tips about how to enjoy the Zoom service. David.
Thanks, Bill. As always, we're recording this for posting onto YouTube later. So if you're not comfortable with your image appearing in our YouTube recording, you might want to click on the stop video. But of course, we like seeing your faces, and you can subscribe to our channel, of course. We'll have a Q&A after the close of the service and after the recording has ended. So it's less pressure on people because that Q&A and chat, and it turns into a social time, won't be part of the recording. So back to the studio.
Thanks very much, David. And speaking of Zoom, we've been doing this for a while, and the board and Hal Majette and David and I have been working on ways to how to bring us all together in person. And so we're going to turn it over to Hal Majette, our president, who's got some news in that regard. Hal, are you there?
I am here. Can you hear me?
I can hear you perfectly.
There's several of us that met yesterday. One of the things, it has been 364 days since we've met in Grace Fellowship Hall. There have been changes and constant changes. And yesterday, David Rush, Bill Harlan, and Ron Usry and myself, we were outside looking around. If we're going to have an outdoor service, how would we do it? And Bill and David are very task oriented. And Bill, we walked all over the building and all around the grounds of where a good place would be. And then figuring out the technicalities of it. And I honestly was really impressed with David came up with this great schematic. And I learned a lot about how we can do the functions of this. How do we set up? How can we still have a Zoom and still have an outdoor service and still record it? It's not simple. And so that's what we're going to try. I have not talked to the board yet on this, and we need to talk about specific times. But I would mark April 4th as a possible point that we could be outside and have an outdoor service and be meeting one another. Of course, there would be mask and separation. But anyway, we're all working for this, and I really Bill and David have driven this thing, and so that's what we're looking for. We're looking for some changes, and we're looking for some positivity, and I think we're going to be there. We might meet just a little bit earlier, and it has to do with sunshine and shade and other things of that nature. But we're really looking forward to bringing a more physical presence. And I think that touches it. So I'll let you know more after we meet with the board and they make decisions. So that's it, Bill. Thank you very much.
Hal, did you want to say when that board meeting will be?
Yeah, the board meeting, we chose St. Patrick's Day, which always can wear some green, but it's going to be on March 17th. I'll have a Zoom link out, and I will try to do better with the Zoom than I did last time. I messed around with the audio, and so if anybody would like to participate in that, there will be a Zoom link. March 17th at 10:30. So thank you.
Is that Wednesday?
That is going to be Wednesday.
Great. Thanks, Hal. We also have our continuing announcements, which are really more reminders that our fellowship continues to support Paz Amigos, which helps immigrants recently released from detention and helps we also help the Homeless Resource Network and Feeding the Valley. All of that continues to be important, and we'll talk about how you can send us some money if you so desire during the offering. Are there any other brief announcements that anybody has? And I'll let Elise and David kind of scan the Zoomography to see if anybody else has an announcement. Hearing none. We start our services by lighting the chalice, and I should really say by lighting a chalice. The flaming chalice symbolizes for us reason, tolerance, and freedom, and also justice, compassion, and love. Now let's take a moment to get centered, and let's affirm the 7 principles that sum up the core values of Unitarian Universalism. I'll read them, and you can read them at home if you want, or just follow along. Number 1, the inherent worth and dignity of every person. 2, justice, equity, and compassion in human relations. 3 is acceptance of one another. 3 is acceptance of one another and encouragement to spiritual growth in our congregations. 4 is a free and responsible search for truth and meaning. 5 is the right of conscience and the use of the democratic process within our congregations and in society at large. And this is a big one in UU, it continues to be, is working for a democratic process throughout the United States, and particularly for us here in Georgia. 6, the goal of world community with peace, liberty, and justice for all. And 7, respect for the interdependent web of all existence of which we are a part. One of the ways we proclaim the vitality of our fellowship is by sharing brief and personal joys and concerns. Please note, this is not a time for announcements or commercials or politics. Rather, it's a time to share what's personally important in our own lives. And I'll start by lighting a candle for sorrows or concerns that you might not want to share on a Zoom meeting. And David and Elise, will you scan the congregation, scan the fellowship, and see if anybody else has a joy or a concern?
I have a joy in that so many of our congregation have gotten vaccinated. I have to thank Elise for that. A lot of it. You've really been trooping the line and grabbing things and connecting people and places. But it's a joy. And Michelle is busy over there writing down everybody's names. We have like 32 people.
About 32.
And it's just marvelous that we are moving forward. We're living our creed. So that's my joy, is that we're doing the right thing.
Thanks, Hal. I would second that one. Another tradition in our fellowship is our celebration of life toast. And we do it a little differently on Zoom. You can join in with a cup of coffee or another beverage. Our toast is not a sacrament. It carries no doctrinal significance or symbolism. It's simply a warm tradition. We invite you to share it with us. Please lift your cups. I'll read the toast, and we'll all join together in the last line. We celebrate life with its beauty and its pain. We lift these cups in tribute to the achievements of human minds and hands, and in sensitivity to the frustrations of misfortune and heartache, not fixing blame or credit for the outcome of chance, sensing the risk, savoring the joy, sharing it all, knowing of the certainty of death and remembering the value of each moment. We drink our toast of celebration to this time, to the future, to each other, to the throbbing of the earth and sea and sky with life. Together, we drink this toast in celebration of life. This morning's offering will now be given and received in a spirit of very grateful fellowship. You can mail offerings to UUFC at P.O. Box 698, Fortson, Georgia, 31808. That's appearing in the chat, and it will also appear on your screen someplace up here, I bet. Or use PayPal. Simply go to PayPal, sign in, hit the send money button, and as the recipient, use our email address, which is uufcga@gmail.com. So while you look for your checkbook or sign into PayPal, Whittaker will play for us the Chopin Prelude number 15. Whittaker. Thank you, Whittaker. This morning's reading, once again, comes to us from Danielle Neale. This week, she's on the road in Massachusetts. Last week, she read Cherish Your Doubt. This week's reading is Simply Cherish the Earth. So obviously, she's on a cherish theme for her readings. But more importantly, Danielle, just by way of a brief introduction, I hope brief, she chose a reading from William F. Schultz, who I have kind of been aware that is a big deal in Unitarian Universalism. He was the president of the UUA, I think, during the late 1980s, early 1990s, and then he went on to be, I think, the executive director of Amnesty International. And he currently holds I think he's still a senior fellow at the Carr Center for Human Rights Policy at Harvard's Kennedy School of Government. He's an author, lots of interesting sounding books, and it's thank you, Danielle, for reminding me to look more closely into some of our UUs. I think he's got a great bibliography that you can delve deeply into. So this morning, Danielle is coming to us, as I said, from Massachusetts with Cherish Your Doubt by William F. Schultz. David, you can cue up Danielle.
Thank you for joining me today at the Hopedale Unitarian Parish in Hopedale, Massachusetts. Founded in 1867, the building was dedicated in 1898. I've chosen this parish because it's an accredited green sanctuary and goes along with my reading today by William F. Schultz entitled Simply Cherish the Earth. Regardless of our differences, there are a host of affirmations that we embrace as the basis for our faith. Whatever we think the holy may be, creation itself is holy. We make no distinctions between the natural and the supernatural, the secular and the sacred. We simply cherish the earth and all its creatures, the stars in all their glory. Life's gifts are available to everyone, not just the chosen or the saved. Only human artifice or blind ill fortune can separate us from the source of our blessings. That which is divine, precious, or profound is made evident not in the miraculous or otherworldly, but in the simple and the everyday. We look not to the heavens or an afterlife for our meaning, but to the exuberance of this life's unfolding. Human beings themselves are responsible for the planet and its future. Social and environmental justice is a religious obligation. The future is never fated. Every one of us is held in creation's hand. We share its burdens and its radiance. Hence, strangers need not be enemies. The earth is our cherished home. All its inhabitants are companions. Though death confronts us all, we love life all the more, perhaps because we lose it. An honorable and impassioned life may not deny death its due, but it can surely deny us of its victory. I hope you get out today and enjoy the beautiful weather and all that nature has to offer. Thank you for listening.
Bill, you're muted.
Okay, thank you, Danielle, and thank you, David. You didn't wear your muted t-shirt, so I didn't quite understand what was going on. This morning's talk, as I said earlier, is by Gwyn Rush, who I think most of us know is the daughter of David and Amanda Reese. And she's spoken to us before. Last year, she talked to us. She's the public relations coordinator for Metro Atlanta Youth Energy Corps. And she's also studying studying international relations at Agnes Scott College in Decatur. And she's actually getting ready to graduate. And after she graduates this fall, she will begin her studies at the University of London, pandemic willing, in environment, politics, and development. She'll be earning a master's degree in that field, and she's really been digging deeply into this field. Her talk this morning, A Healthy Environment as a Human Right, is not just about the seventh principle. If you've been following along at home, you can also count the first, second, and sixth principles, maybe a couple more. So we're delighted to have her here. She comes to us live from home. So Gwyn, welcome.
Thank you so much. So, like Bill said, I'm going to be talking to you today about a healthy environment as a human right, which is basically a story of how a clean, healthy environment became understood as a guaranteed right and something that everyone should have access to. So first, hello, my name is Gwyn Rush. I am an international relations major at Agnes Scott College, graduating this May, as Bill mentioned. And I specialize in sustainable development within my degree. And also, as Bill mentioned, I'm also public relations coordinator at the Metro Atlanta Youth Energy Corps, or MAYCORps, which is a youth-led environmental justice organization in Metro Atlanta. So I've been involved in environmental justice work for about 2 years now. So that's why I'm coming to talk to you about it today and sort of the origins of this movement and what it means. So first, what is environmental justice? So environmental justice is the right to live and work and play in a clean environment. And that's from Dr. Robert Bullard, who's considered the father of environmental justice. So this may seem to some like a pretty straightforward concept, but it's a relatively new concept in terms of guaranteeing that right for everyone. But it makes sense, right? Because we can't really do much else if we don't have an environment which is deeply tied to our health and our ability to do so many other things. And as Bill mentioned, this ties into a lot of UU principles. The first principle of the inherent worth and dignity of every person. The second principle of justice, equity, and compassion in human relations. The sixth principle, the goal of world community with peace, liberty, and justice for all. And the seventh principle, respect for the interdependent web of all existence of which we are a part. And something that sort of distinguishes environmental justice from more mainstream environmentalism or conservation is that it is human focused. It's not looking at animals and thinking, okay, we need to preserve this other species. Specifically, it's thinking about how do our actions impact the environment, which includes humans. And it's also often along lines of race and class, especially race. So because of that, the history of environmental justice really started around the civil rights movement. And so there are sort of 5 brief points I wanted to kind of go over. This is a really big movement. It's had a lot of impact, especially in recent social justice and environmental movements. So I thought I'd just kind of give you a really brief overview of like some high points and really understanding where this movement came from and what it is. So the first one is the civil rights movement. Looks like my formatting got a little messed up here when I saved it. But so in 1964, the civil rights movement kind of came to its peak, right? So it laid the legal framework for challenging racial discrimination with the Civil Rights Act of 1964. And it really emphasized the fact that people should be guaranteed these certain rights. And a lot of it was focused on things like employment or voting. But it really laid the path for environmental justice to become a movement, which it wasn't before this. So not only did it lay down this legal framework of racial discrimination, but also it trained many activists and organizers in successful strategies for combating injustice. So a lot of the people who began the environmental justice movement came out of the civil rights movement and knew these tactics. And something interesting that not many people know about necessarily is actually Dr. Martin Luther King Jr.'s last protest before his assassination that took place in Memphis, Tennessee, was over, in part, unhealthy working conditions for Memphis sanitation workers, which is an environmental justice issue. So even at sort of this height of the environment or the civil rights movement, it's starting to turn and think about what are these environmental justice concerns, even if environmental justice as a concept wasn't really in mainstream vocabulary. The second point that's really important for understanding the environmental justice movement was in 1982 in Warren County, North Carolina. where a toxic landfill was scheduled to be placed in a low-wealth, majority Black community. The town protested for 6 weeks against this landfill being placed because of concerns of these toxins getting into their water supply. And although they failed to stop the landfill from being placed there, it was the first environmental justice protest to garner national attention. So there have been efforts before this, but this was the first time where specifically environmental justice concern really captured the nation on the news. I believe a member of Congress got arrested in these protests. So it really captured the nation's attention in thinking about, how does this environment play with the fact that, low wealth communities of color don't have as much power to determine what kind of pollutants are and aren't placed near their communities. Sort of the third really important point in understanding this movement is in 1987, when a report titled Toxic Waste and Race was published. So the Commission for Racial Justice at the United Church of Christ published a landmark report that showed 3 out of every 5 Latinx and Black people lived near a toxic waste site. So you may notice here that this is a religious community that's really spearheading this, and the fact that it's a piece of data. And those are 2 really important things for understanding the environmental justice movement. It came a lot from communities of faith, especially communities of color and faith communities within that, as well as the importance of data, because these things have been true for a very long time, that toxic waste sites and pollution are more likely to be placed near communities of color that are especially low income. But these reports that showed it in a very explicit way were really important in sort of getting people to understand this pattern and understand it as a really important issue to address. So this is one of the first reports that was ever published directly tying pollution and environmental hazards to environmental racism. Sort of the fourth really important point in this movement was in 1990 when Dr. Robert Bullard published a book called Dumping in Dixie. So as I mentioned earlier, he's considered the father of the environmental justice movement. And he published this book titled Dumping in Dixie that was one of the first books to outline the causes of environmental racism. So it really aimed to sort of sit down, define what environmental justice is specifically in environmental racism, which is racial justice is a huge part of the environmental justice movement because it came out of the civil rights movement. It's led by people of color. And so this is really one of the first efforts to give you in one place an understanding of environmental justice and why it's important. And that's 1990, which isn't that long ago. And then sort of the fifth point in this is in the 21st century when the climate crisis comes in. So as you may have noticed beforehand, a lot of these issues are very localized. So it's talking about, a landfill being placed in a specific county, or, an industrial plant being placed next to a certain neighborhood, which is very localized, and that is very important. But today, the environmental justice movement has really broadened to think globally about how people across the globe are having impacts on other people disproportionately in terms of the environment. And that's where the climate crisis comes in. So the environmental justice movement came out of the face of very localized problems. However, it is now expanded to address the climate crisis where, for example, big corporations in the United States are having huge negative impacts on the global South in terms of who is facing the impacts of the climate crisis and who is responsible for them. So it's sort of now expanded to global inequality and who is responsible and who's facing those impacts. So given sort of that history, the most important elements to understanding this movement are these 4 things, in my opinion. The first one is that data and publications are crucial. So these issues have been happening for decades and decades. These aren't new. These aren't things that emerged after 1964. But the fact that people have started looking at them and then publishing data and reports on it are what has sort of shifted this focus to understanding it as an issue. The second one is that it is people first environmental action led by people of color. So like I said earlier, instead of focusing on, conservation, focusing on, saving a specific species of bird, understanding that environmental impacts have an impact on humans as well. And we are interconnected within that. So it's really sort of making it broader and incorporating more people, especially low-income people, people of color, and the global South in general. The third one is that community action is a crucial tool. So in all of those, for example, the protests in Warren County, or people of faith communities coming together to create these reports, that community action has been indispensable in understanding environmental justice as an issue and pushing it forward. And then the fourth thing to note is the recent shift from local to global injustice. So thinking about how these global power dynamics are impacting environmental injustice across the world. So with that, I thought I'd end with sort of an example, because these are all in some ways, very broad statements, and sort of giving an example of what environmental injustice looks like in Columbus, Georgia. So there was a report that came out probably in the last 1 or 2 years that explained that Columbus, Georgia was number 4 in the country for racial disparities in neighborhood temperatures. So what does that mean? So the study looked at 108 urban areas nationwide. The formerly red line neighborhoods of every city studied were hotter than the non-red line neighborhoods, some by nearly 13 degrees. So in Columbus specifically, and this is a map here of neighborhoods that were formerly redlined, which means that they received less resources. This was before, sort of in the mid-1900s and before that. So the surface temperatures between formerly redlined majority Black neighborhoods were on average 10 degrees hotter than the highest rated neighborhoods. So that means I can go from one place in Columbus that was formerly not redlined and highest rated, and it will be maybe 80 degrees. And I can go maybe a mile away, if not less, and it will be 90 degrees. And that's just average. And so that has really big impacts because our health is deeply impacted by the temperature that's around us. So if it's already 10 degrees hotter outside, that means it's going to be hotter inside your house. You're having to possibly spend more money to heat or cool your house to be the temperature that you want it to be. And all of that has huge health implications that are deeply tied to your location and your race in Columbus. And I sort of thought I'd end with this quote that's really applicable to this example from Dr. Buller that says, environmental injustice is rooted in racial discrimination in housing, land use planning, and zoning. Lines of demarcation on race and class were used to confine and segregate individuals and communities. This historical pattern still stands to this day. And there's truly, I mean, there are many examples of what that can be, but I think in Columbus here, looking at neighborhood temperatures, that's a super clear example of what Dr. Bullard is talking about and what environmental injustice looks like and the impacts that it's having on people. So yes, I'm open for questions once the service has ended. But yeah, I hope this was sort of an insightful look at environmental justice, what it is, why it's important, what it looks like, and where it came from. Thank you.
Thank you, Gwyn. That was, yeah, applause from everybody that's muted. That was really interesting, and really to end on that powerful local note. I know I have questions, and I'll bet some other people have some questions too. So Gwyn will stick around after the final hymn. So let's move towards that goal. We extinguish the chalice here that it might flow gently in our hearts. May it light your path as we leave this place. Now, would everyone please rise in body or metaphorically in spirit for our closing words. With unity of spirit, we go our ways in universal fellowship until we meet again. And now Whittaker will play us home with an appropriate hymn, number 7, The Leaf Unfurling. And before he does that, I thought maybe I could get away with explaining a slight difference in Whittaker's appearance, that from the after the opener, he scurried out and got a haircut and then did the offertory. And then I realized that his final hymn, which he also recorded, will go back to the old haircut, but that's okay. It's a beautiful hymn. I also forgot to mention, and you'll see this on the slide, next week we're going to have another really interesting presentation. This is International Women's History Month this month, and Connie Usry will help us celebrate that with a look at women who are making history right now. So please do join us next Sunday. That would be May 21st. Remember, stick around after the hymn. Here's Whittaker Locke, hymn number 7, The Leaf Unfurling.